During the COVID pandemic, I did what a lot of people have done, maybe what you've done. I got rid of stuff. And I was going through some old boxes that held keepsakes. And as I was doing that, I ran across some cards and some notes that my daughters have given me through the years, like this one that my now teenage daughter gave me when she was probably about 4 years old. And on the inside of this, she scribbled, "You are a great dad." A little later, I got a card, and on the inside of it, she scribbled, "You help me grow," as the card sings to me,
You're cool, caring, and clever. You're the greatest man in the world. I'll love you forever.
Now, that would bring a tear to my eye if it wasn't the kind of sound that haunts me in my nightmares. And now I give that gift to you. In the same box, I actually found a note that was written a few years later. And the reason I know that is because her penmanship had improved drastically. But I also think that this is an indication that she had become a bit more restrained. This is simply a Post-it note that she wrote to me, and it simply says, "I love you so much. You have been a great dad so far." I love getting these little messages from my kids. That's why we keep them. But you know, what I'm mostly concerned with are the messages that I'm giving or leaving with them. What were the messages that you heard growing up from the family that you got? You know, things that you heard from them directly, or maybe just things you caught from their behavior, from your parents, your guardians, your grandparents, maybe your siblings. What are those messages that still stick with you today? Now, of course, I hope that you got the message that you're valuable, or you're full of potential, or you have meaning, you're worth knowing, and you can belong. But maybe the messages that you heard or the ones you caught were that you just weren't good enough, or that you can't be forgiven or included if you cross certain lines, or you shouldn't dream too much. You get in the way. Maybe it's messages like, "I hate you," or "You're useless," or "Don't you embarrass us." Or maybe it's like, "Why can't you be like," fill in the blank. Maybe it's that expressing your feelings is inconvenient, or conflict is something to be avoided, or your voice does not matter. What were some of those messages? Maybe if you would, leave them in the comments below, because I'll bet you are not the only one, and that might encourage somebody else today. This series that we're in is all about your emotional health. We want your emotions to be stronger. We want your emotional health to be freer than maybe it is right now. And maybe you're asking, why would a church care about this? Well, we are convinced, and this is the premise of the whole series, that spiritual maturity cannot happen without emotional maturity. You know, maybe many of the messages that we learned growing up produce some of our emotional states today, even decades after you have moved out of the home of your family of origin. Now, too many Jesus followers have thought, well, God is just supposed to fix all that stuff if I go to church enough, or I pray in just the right way, or as I've experienced it, God is just a version of what I grew up with on divine steroids. So if he's not going to fix it, maybe he is just a stronger, impenetrable version of what I had in my dad, good or bad. Yeah, it's true that trusting our lives to Jesus means that we are now defined by Jesus. Our standing before God is perfect. But here's what I want you to know. God is inviting us into a journey of becoming that person he's declared us to be. But to do this, we have to look back. We have to look back at how we have been functioning, or maybe just learned to function, in contrast to what Jesus would have us do. We cannot break patterns that we haven't identified. Of course, if you're not a follower of Jesus, I certainly don't expect you to care at all about what Jesus tells you to do, but you might be fascinated to find out what your life would look like, even if you were to pretend for a little while to follow Jesus. You might find that it is a vast improvement on what you've been trying and the messages that you received. So I introduced the idea that we all get messages left with us from our family of origin. And I don't want any of us to think that it's not going to happen to us. that somehow we don't have to address those messages and make intentional choices to counteract them if they're not helpful for us or destructive, because every single generation is telling us this exact same story, which is why we can go back thousands of years. In the biographies contained in the Bible, you see really, really courageous generations, ones that are trusting God beyond all reason, it seems, with trusting God with the impossible and passing that on to the next generation, like Abraham to his son Isaac, and then Isaac to his son Jacob, and then Jacob to his son Joseph. But what you also see in those exact same generations are destructive habits of one generation degenerating the next generation and the next one and the next one until somebody finally decides to break the pattern. Like, for instance, Abraham. He lied and he put his wife in harm's way. And then his son Isaac's marriage was full of lies. And his son Jacob, total fraud. Abraham slept around on his wife. So did his son Isaac. Abraham showed favoritism. Isaac favored Esau over his twin brother Jacob. Then Jacob famously repeats the pattern. Jacob had 10 kids, and then he has this son Joseph, and he gives him the dream coat. That's the Joseph that you've heard of. And at first, it doesn't seem like Joseph, with all of what he's inherited, wore that favoritism very well. He was going to repeat the pattern unless something changed. He's clearly gifted. There's a reason, it seems, that he would be the favorite. But he's arrogant, and he's a little dismissive when we first encounter him in the biography, and he's doomed to repeat the pattern. In fact, he was so unbearable that his brothers got to where they said about him in Genesis chapter 37, "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." So, and maybe your siblings have thought that in their minds. Hopefully they've not acted on it, but these brothers did. They throw him into this cistern, and then they go back to do what this family does: lie, if it helps him. Now, one of his brothers thinks that this is going just a little bit too far, and so Judah, that brother, speaks up, jumping down to verse 29. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's just sell him." Guys, be reasonable. Let's just sell our brother. Sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. And after all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. It's the least that we could do for him. And his brothers agreed. Like, come on, guys, what are we doing here? This is pretty messed up. Let's not leave him to die. Let's just sell him. Now, when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, they came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern, and they sold him, just like they said they were going to do, for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took Joseph to Egypt. Now, I hope it didn't get this bad in your family, but you and I absolutely benefit or suffer from our family culture in some sorts of ways, our patterns that we grew up with. Joseph had his whole life to live, but he gets detoured by an incredibly unhealthy family. But here's where it gets interesting. Joseph does not repeat history. I want to jump over to Genesis chapter 39 here, just to check in on Joseph's story after he was sold. Verse 1, when Joseph was taken to Egypt again by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And then as his story goes on, and I encourage you to read it, you're going to see a little different approach that Joseph takes to life. Joseph decides to cling to God more than he could cling to his bitterness, even though no one would blame him for living with a chip on his shoulder. He even gets wrongfully accused while he's living in Potiphar's house of rape, and then he's thrown into prison. Joseph still decides to cling to God. Now, I want to summarize the next few years of Joseph's life, and that doesn't really do it justice, but I want to get to where he broke from the pattern of his past and maybe take a look at how we could do that so it's helpful for us. In prison, after he's wrongfully accused, he gains influence with the guards and the prisoners. He becomes liked by people. He becomes trusted because of his integrity. That's not something that arrogant and dismissive people in dreamcoats get. He eventually gets released, and through a series of events becomes the prime minister of Egypt, the world superpower at the time. And it's a wild story. But the bottom line is that this famine hits in the larger kingdom, and it brings his brothers groveling to Egypt to get resources that they could bring back to their starving family. And what they couldn't have possibly known is that the brother that they had sold years ago was now a decorated leader in this world superpower. And what they certainly wouldn't have expected was that Joseph, who could have made their lives a living hell now that they're at a point of need, decides to bring his whole family, including their dad, to live in Egypt, safe and sound and fed. But it would be 13 years before any of that happens. Imagine that. Joseph having to choose to live a different pattern of life over 13 years before he sees, at least as far as we can tell, any fruit or any results or any change in the outcome of his behavior. So let me just tell you this. Depending on what you've got to unpack, depending on what messages have been placed on your life, it may take so much longer than you want to start seeing a different kind of life emerge. It could take a lifetime of making different choices. It takes methodical, choice by choice movement in the opposite direction. You know, it might be years into your marriage before you really start to see results. It might be years on the job before you really start to see some results. Years into therapy, or certainly years walking in faith before you are really living a truly different story than the one that you inherited in your family of origin. The forces that have shaped all of us are just that strong. The messages that were placed on all of us early on are just that sticky. But please trust this. History does not repeat itself. You choose to repeat history. And so you can choose to change it. You can choose a different future. Case in point, back to Joseph, right? Things are going pretty well now that he's brought his family into Egypt safe and sound and fed until his dad dies. And I want to jump over to Genesis chapter 50. This is near the end of the account of Joseph's life. And in verse 15, now that his dad is dead, listen to what the brothers decide to do. Now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became fearful. Now Joseph is going to show anger. He will show his anger and pay us back for all the wrong that we did to him. In other words, that's what we would do if someone did to us what we did to him. So what do? They do what their family always does. Say it with me. They lie. Verse 16. So they sent this message to Joseph. Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, please forgive your brothers for the great wrong they did to you, for their sin in treating you so cruelly. So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive our sin. Now check this out. When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. What might have made this extra emotional or maybe just exhausting for Joseph is just the thought that, like, man, what do I have to do to prove that I'm not living like this anymore, that I'm not going to repeat the pattern of this family that we all grew up in? This is your guilty conscience, and this is your unaddressed patterns. Just because you can't trust me doesn't mean that I'm not trustworthy. And so he repeats in verse 19, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid. Listen to this. Such a different pattern. I will continue to take care of you, even if that's not what you chose to do for me and your children. And so he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. You know what? Maybe I wanted to punish you, but I'm not God and I'm not going to act like it. I'm releasing that. All right? I'm not going to ignore what you did. You wanted to hurt me. Joseph said you intended this for harm, but that does not tell me how to live. I don't have to repeat those patterns even if you want to keep rolling them out. I have been clinging to God so often for so long that I've just seen something. And I believe God's Spirit is telling all of us this today. Listen, your past shouldn't tell you what's possible. Your past, no matter how difficult, no matter what messages were placed on your life, should not tell you what's possible. Ultimately, your life is not ruled by your past when it's ruled by God. Joseph could have wasted his life by doing things we would understandably agree with, or maybe even we would model ourselves. He could wallow in pity. He could plot revenge. He could have held on to bitterness, blamed his family for absolutely everything, and his therapist would have been like, yeah, that was pretty messed up. He could have repeated the same patterns that he picked up. He could have been a manipulator. He could have been a player. He could have been a shark. He could have been a backstabber. And you wouldn't need a psychology degree to see where he got that idea from. But this man broke the multi-generational patterns by wanting to follow God's vision for his life. He drew a line in the sand with his life and said, this all stops with me. I'm not going to carry this forward. I have a messed up family of origin. I've got my own messed up past. But better than all of that, Joseph is saying, I have an eternal, perfect Father who's with me and wants to empower me to tell a different story with my life. I know where I've been, but it's not who I am, and it's not where I'm going. We have the same chance today. You and I, we have the same chance today to break destructive patterns so that they're not carried forward in our lives or into the lives of the next generation, the people that we influence. So let's use the past rather than be ruled by it. So here's some practical ways that you can begin that journey. Find something to scribble on, maybe Post-it notes like my daughter had, and start writing down some of the messages that you got growing up. The good ones, maybe stick it on one side of the table, and some of the bad messages or the disappointing messages or the challenging, destructive messages they got, maybe put it on a different side of the table. Maybe it's like, you have to achieve to prove your worth. That's one of the messages that you got. Or maybe the opposite, which could be even more debilitating. Hey, no pressure, no pressure. We don't really expect much from you. Write that message down. Put that on that side of the table. Maybe you got the message, it's okay to lie if it helps you and it doesn't really hurt anybody. That's a destructive pattern. Write that message down. Put that on the table. Maybe it's when marriage or work or church gets tough. Run away. That's not a helpful message. Maybe write that one down, put it on the table. And that right there, that process, take time with it. That's a huge first step for you to write a different story. But I'm going to invite you to take the next powerful step. I want you to try and see, as best you can, how the messages that you've picked up along the way compare to how God's family is supposed to function. Maybe not the way you've seen it modeled. Maybe you've seen some destructive patterns in people who are claiming to trust Jesus with their lives, but in God's vision for his family, how's it supposed to function? Like, for instance, you are loved regardless of how you perform. That's the love that you can now show everybody else as well. You are forgiven even before you change, and certainly before you pay anybody back, because you never can. Relationship precedes rules. When you're spiritually adopted by God, like we said in the beginning, your standing changes, but it's going to take a lifetime to acclimate. Jesus said, abide in me, make yourself at home with me, and inevitably your life is going to start to bear fruit. You're going to see some eternal results through your lives. I know these parents who actually adopted a daughter, and her standing now in this family was she was the daughter of my friend's family. But she couldn't, at least initially, accept their love at first. Because of her own background, and this sometimes happens in adoptive situations, because of her background, she would go to a kitchen full of food and then take some of that food out of the fridge and hide it in her room. They would sometimes hold her, and she would purposefully, and this is a little rough, she would purposefully defecate on them. It was what they found out later, sort of a defense mechanism, since she had been so rejected before. She wanted to be proactively rejecting before she's rejected again. I had a friend who, years after college, still right now, can't get traction in life. And what he would tell you is that he was raised by a dad who gave up trying after he had an injury at work. And in all honesty, he has said it has really impacted his own hopes and dreams. I talked to a woman in Radius several months ago who confessed that she gives herself to every man who will give her attention because her parents never did. She needed to hear a better story about what she was worth. You know, around the time that my daughter was writing me some of those first cards, I had this habit of asking her things like, "Why are you so awesome?" and "Why are you so smart?" or "Why are you so funny?" And one day, I'll never forget, I remember asking her, "Why are you so beautiful?" And she said, "Because you love me." Now, my love did not change her appearance. No, she just trusted what I see when I see her. Do you see the difference? She trusted what I see when I see her, and I pray that that message sticks. I want more and more for my life to be evaluated, to be seen, to be empowered by what God must see in me as he looks at my life. That he has declared me a perfect fit for him in Jesus. And if that's the case, then I have everything that I need to begin to live a different life than maybe some of the destructive or demeaning or devaluing messages that I got early on. We have to look back. We have to look back, not so that we can be ruled by this past, but instead we can be transformed moving forward. We can make different choices, and it's going to be painful. It's going to feel tedious, all right? You might even feel like you're betraying your family if you cast a spotlight on some of what you find back there, but please do not stop short of doing this work. If we don't look at the past and the messages that we might have received, we will inevitably create challenges for the people that we care about most. And you'll never know what it's like to feel fully free to live your own story, the one that God carved out for you before you were born. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for constantly whispering to us who you see when you look at us. You whisper to us, and you're whispering to someone right now, you are worth choosing. You are worth believing in. Jesus, you're whispering to someone right now, you are worth loving to death. God, with that in mind, give us the courage to look back at a past that gave us messages that are in contrast to that. Messages, God, that we are doomed to repeat, patterns we are doomed to repeat if we don't identify and intentionally make a different choice with our lives moving forward. God, give us the courage, give us the wisdom to see that, to become who we really are in you. Jesus, we pray this in your name. Amen.
Thank you for joining us this week. If you're new, we want to meet and support you. Just go to radius.church and click the I'm New button so we can have someone reach out to you, get you your free Starbucks card. Next week, our message is titled, How to Stop Needing Control. Yeah, I know, it's a big one, so you're not going to want to miss it. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us reach more people, and no matter where you are at, Radius is here for you. See you next week, Radius.